We're just a few short days out from UFC Fight Night 131. As you've probably noticed by now, I did not make an intro for these predictions, and I apologize for that. Consider this a short notice video, but don't worry, I'm going to have a sick intro on UFC 225 next week, and I'm going to try to release some non-prediction MMA videos as well. But don't let the fact that there's not a 45-second intro on this video distract you from the great free fights that we have this weekend. And I do think this is a very solid card with multiple Fight of the Night contenders. So without any further ado, let's get right into these predictions. So right off the bat, we already have an amazing fight with Gian Villante and Sam Alvey. This fight is pretty much guaranteed to be a brawl that stays on the feet, and unless these guys just decide not to fight, I think we're guaranteed a lot of action. This is going to be Sam's second fight at light heavyweight. He recently had his light heavyweight debut and he won by knockout. He looked phenomenal. He definitely has enough power for the weight class. He will be the smaller guy in this fight, slightly smaller, but I think his striking technique is going to be better than John's, so it's going to kind of cancel out the size difference. In John's last fight, I can't say I was too impressed, if we're being honest. He won the fight decisively, but he ate a lot of shots, and it just looked like he was slow and didn't have his timing. So I think unless he's made huge improvements, Sam is going to be able to come into this fight and catch John with some big shots and maybe put him out. So this fight's going to be a brawl. Brawls are usually hard to predict, but my prediction is Sam Alvey by knockout or decision. Next up, we have another fight that I think is going to be a knockdown dragout for sure. We have Daniel Teymur, who's coming off a Fight of the Night performance, versus Julio Arce, who had a very impressive performance on Dana White's Contender Series, and he won his UFC debut. These are two young guys who are looking to make a name for themselves in the featherweight division. I think it's going to be a back-and-forth fight. I think it's going to be a close fight, too. Both of these guys, few losses on their records, came to quality opponents. Julio lost to Brian Kelleher twice, and Daniel Teymur lost to Danny Henry. No shame in those losses. I'm really not sure who's going to be the favorite in this fight, but with my prediction, I have to give the edge to Julio. I think the difference is going to be his striking and slight reach advantage. I think he's going to be able to outstrike Daniel Teymur. Pepper him with shots from the outside, maybe land a big shot. He could drop Daniel. I think Daniel's going to 100% want to brawl as well, but I think if later in the fight, if he realizes that he's not landing the better shots and he doesn't have a knockdown, he's probably going to start shooting for takedowns. And Julio has a very high takedown defense percentage. So far with his UFC debut, he defended 92% of the shots. But on the other hand, in the striking, Daniel Teymur absorbs a lot of shots as well, and Julio has a high output of strikes. So I think this fight is going to be won by Julio on the feet, and I think he's not going to get taken down. So with my prediction, I have to say Julio by decision. So there's no doubt that the first two fights on this main card are going to be violent masterpieces, as Jimmy Smith would say. But with this third fight, Jake Ellenberger versus Ben Saunders, I mean, this is going to be an absolute slobber knocker. Like, somebody is actually going to die. I think this is going to be the first UFC death. Both of these guys have been on the receiving end of some crazy highlight reel knockouts. Ben Saunders most recently got knocked out by Alan Juban. I actually think this is too far or too quick of a return for Ben Saunders. I mean, that knockout was a knockout of the year contender for sure. Probably did a lot of brain damage, and he got dropped a lot in that fight. I mean, he got clobbered. So I think this is a little bit too soon for Ben to come back. Jake has taken a fair amount of time off, but obviously some of his most recent fights, he got knocked out by Mike Perry, and he got knocked out by Stephen Thompson. So this is definitely a must-win fight for Jake Ellenberger. And you look at his record and you say, oh my God, Jake has only won 2 of his last 9. Why has he not retired yet? And most of those losses were by knockout. But with this fight, I mean, he's fighting Ben Saunders. And at this point, I'd say Ben is just a walking pile of CTE. And I mean no disrespect with that. I'm actually concerned for the guy's health. Jake Ellenberger, the dude hits hard. There's no denying that. So does Ben Saunders. I think this fight's going to come down to who lands the bigger shots first. I think Jake does definitely have a wrestling advantage, and maybe if things don't go his way on the feet and he starts getting tagged, he'll take Ben down. But really, I don't see this going to a decision. This is my prediction for Fight of the Night, and I don't see it going to the final bell. Jake, a lot of people are probably counting him out because he's lost so many fights by knockout recently, but I really think he hits hard. I mean, the dude dropped Stephen Thompson, so I think he's going to be able to get on the inside of Ben Saunders' reach, land a huge shot, maybe get a highlight reel knockout, and walk away with the victory, and maybe walk away from the sport. But with this one, my prediction is Jake Ellenberger by knockout. Next up, we have Walt Harris versus Daniel Spitz. It seems like every video, or at least for the past couple videos, I've had a short but sweet prediction, one that doesn't really take that much technical analysis, and on this card, that is definitely this fight. With Walt Harris, we have a guy that if he doesn't knock you out, he loses. I mean, that's really his whole entire fighting style. If he doesn't knock you out, he's most likely not going to win, or at least he hasn't yet. With Daniel Spitz, we have a guy that's fairly new in the UFC, but he has a victory over Anthony Hamilton by knockout, and he's definitely the much more well-rounded guy. With this one, it's pretty much, it goes without saying that if Walt Harris wins, it's going to be by knockout. But if he doesn't get the knockout, I think Daniel Spitz is probably going to win by decision or maybe submission. Fabricio Verdum got the submission on Walt Harris fairly easily without any effort at all. So I think Daniel Spitz, if he puts in work, he could probably get the submission as well. He just has to worry about not getting knocked out. But in the past, Walt has struggled with guys that had the height and reach advantage on him, like Shamil Abdurakhimov, and Daniel Spitz also has the height and reach advantage. So with this fight, I'm just gonna say Daniel Spitz by decision. Like I said earlier, obviously if Walt Harris wins, it's going to be by knockout, but you can't just be like, all right, this guy's going to get the knockout. It's a lot harder than just saying that. So I'm going to say Daniel Spitz wins by decision, which I feel is the much more likely outcome. For the co-main event, we have the best fisherman in MMA, Gregor Gillespie versus Vinc Pichel. I feel like this is a fight to determine who will crack the lightweight rankings next. Both of these guys are extremely talented, and both of these guys fought on UFC Charlotte, not against each other, obviously. Gregor Gillespie is a guy that he flies under the radar in the sense that you don't really see him in the media, and he doesn't have that much hype behind him. I honestly would say that probably that many people don't really know about him, but I think he is extremely talented. He was a college wrestler, and he's one of those guys that can just flawlessly translate his wrestling skills into the octagon, basically taking guys down and controlling them at will. You saw that in his last fight with Jordan Rinaldi. Once Gregor got the takedown, it was basically over. He could have won by submission. He could have won by TKO. He chose the TKO route. Vinc Pichel is a guy who's really, really good on the feet. Most of his wins come by knockout. He's a little bit older, though, but that hasn't seemed like it's hindered his performances lately at all. But with this one, I see Gregor doing what he's done to everybody else, using the dominant wrestling, getting the takedown. Vinc Pichel, one of his most devastating losses was to a good wrestler, Rustam Khabilov. I mean, he got suplexed and knocked out in the same fight. So I think Gregor is going to be able to use that same extremely dominant wrestling skill set and just control Vinc Pichel for the entire fight. He won't let Vince use striking on the feet. And I feel like he could get the TKO or sub. Gregor's really a guy who could be in the top 5 within probably 3 more fights, maybe 2 more fights. The dude, I know it sounds like I'm maybe hopping on a bandwagon, but I mean, there's not even a bandwagon for this guy. I don't hear anybody. There's not a hype train for this dude. There really should be because he's really good. So with this one, I'm not counting Vince out. Obviously, he could get the knockout, but I just see Gregor using his wrestling and controlling Vince and probably getting a submission in about the 2nd round and putting on a show for the people in his home state of New York. So with this one, I got to say Gregor Gillespie by submission in the 2nd. And finally, for the main event, we have a bantamweight matchup that's been a couple months in the making. Whoever wins is most likely going to get the next title shot. As you can see, Marlon Moraes has a 24-pack, while Jimmie Rivera looks like he has a slight case of Palumboism. But never mind that, this is going to be an extremely close fight. I had a hard time predicting it, to be honest with you. I feel like it could go either way. What I am a little bit more confident about is that this won't end in a finish. I do think this is going to go to a decision. And Jimmie kind of has turned into a decisionator for like his last 4 or 5 fights, while Marlon is coming off of a highlight reel KO of Aljamain Sterling. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I thought Aljamain was never going to be the same after that. He got taken out on a stretcher. But I personally feel like this fight is going to play out a lot like the Jimmie Rivera-Uriah Faber fight, where Jimmie is just in a closed stance, trying to stay on the outside and strike and not get taken down. And I think Marlon Moraes might play into that as well, although I do think Marlon's going to try to land some big shots. He was saying that Jimmie was growing out his beard because he was scared of his power. Both of these guys have a decently high output of strikes, although Marlon absorbs less. So, I mean, everything else is basically, I think this is going to be a razor-thin decision. I could see cases for both guys, but with this one, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to say Marlon Moraes wins the decision. I think he's going to do more in the fight. I think he's going to be more likely to land big shots, or at least attempt to land big shots. But like I said, this fight is a toss-up, but my final prediction is Marlon Moraes by decision.